What happens when a man who believes the world owes him a listening ear sits across from someone who refuses to worship anyone? When Prince Harry walks into the Joe Rogan Experience expecting another soft platform to repeat his grievances, he doesn't realize he's inches away from a man who makes a living calling out excuses. No audience, no palace, just a table, 2 microphones, and a conversation that stretches for hours, slowly spiraling from awkward to confrontational, until Joe finally says words no royal has ever heard on air. "You know what, man? I'm done. We're cutting this." The studio was dim and familiar, a space millions recognized only through their screens. Neon signs hummed softly against brick walls. A skull sat on one shelf, supplements on another. 2 microphones, 2 pairs of headphones, a cluttered wooden table littered with half-empty water bottles and untouched notes. Joe slipped on his headphones, glanced at his producer through the glass, then turned to his guest. 3, 2, 1, we're live. He flashed his trademark grin. Prince Harry is in the building, ladies and gentlemen. Or I should say Harry. You've been just Harry for a while now, right? Across from him, Harry adjusted his headset. His jaw was tight. He wore a dark sweater, expensive, deliberately casual, the kind of outfit that tried hard to look ordinary but still screamed privilege. "Yes," Harry said. "I gave up the titles. I've said that many times." Joe chuckled. "Yeah, but you still put Prince in the book title. Man." A ripple of laughter came from the control room. Harry's eyes flicked toward the glass, then back to Joe. "It's not my fault people don't know how to let go of labels," he said coolly. "The name doesn't define me." Sure, Joe said, leaning back. "So let's start there. If you don't care about the label, if you're done with the royal stuff, why are you here? Why come on the biggest podcast in the world and talk about it again?" The first jab landed. Not cruel, just pure Rogan. Casual, disarming, but sharp. Harry smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I'm here because there's still a lot people don't understand. The narrative's been twisted. I'm tired of everyone else monetizing my story." Joe raised an eyebrow. "Monetizing your story? Didn't you do a Netflix series, a book, a couple documentaries?" "That's reclaiming my voice," Harry cut in, his tone already sharpening. "There's a difference between profiting off lies and telling your truth." Joe tilted his head. "Okay, but the outcome's the same, right? Cameras, deals, attention. You walked away from the crown but straight into Hollywood. That's kind of a lateral move." Harry's jaw clenched. "I didn't walk into Hollywood. I walked toward freedom. People like you love to pretend that. If I speak, I must be chasing fame. I was born famous. I'm trying to survive it." Joe studied him the way a fighter studies an opponent before throwing the next punch. "All right," he said. "Let's talk about that. You say you're surviving fame, but you're still doing this? You're sitting here, cameras on, millions watching. There are vets, firefighters, regular dads out there who don't get one interview, let alone 10. What makes your struggle more worth hearing than theirs?" Harry almost scoffed. "Coups? My struggle exposes a system most people don't even realize exists. People see a fairy tale. I live the prison underneath it." Joe nodded slowly, tapping the table. "That's a heavy word. Prison. Describe it." Harry leaned forward, shoulders squaring as he warmed to his own language. Every move monitored. Every word calculated. Every relationship dissected. You're not a person, you're an emblem. Even your grief belongs to the public. When my mother died, the world cried louder than my own family. The institution decided what I should feel, when I should appear, what I should say. That's not family, Joe. That's machinery. Asterisk. For a brief moment, Joe's expression softened. He'd seen that look before in soldiers, addicts, broken fighters' pain, and ego tangled together. Okay, he said quietly. That part, I believe. Losing your mom like that? Brutal. No argument. Harry relaxed slightly. But Joe continued. Here's where people get hung up. You talk about that pain, then you throw gasoline on the fire. Interviews, books. You say you want privacy, but you give the whole world front row seats to your therapy sessions. Can you see why that confuses people? Asterisk. Privacy, Harry said slowly, like he was explaining something basic, doesn't mean silence. It means control. I decide what I talk about. That's my right. Asterisk. Joe shrugged. Sure, but people also have the right to think. This guy kind of likes the spotlight. Asterisk. And people have the right to be ignorant. Harry shot back. A beat of silence followed. Joe blinked once. Did you just call my listeners ignorant? Asterisk. Harry's mouth curled into a thin smile. Said people who don't understand nuance are ignorant. If that applies to your listeners, that's not my problem. Asterisk. In the control room, the producer mouthed a silent woe. Asterisk. Joe let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. He leaned forward again. Okay, man, that's one way to start. Let's talk about your brother, William. Asterisk. Harry's shoulders tensed instantly. Asterisk. In your book, Joe continued, you talked about fights, shouting, even physical stuff. Do you regret putting that out there? Do you regret putting that out there? Joe asked. Or was that another reclaiming your voice moment? Asterisk. Harry's gaze went flat. The only thing I regret is trusting people who never protected me, William included. I didn't expose anything that wasn't already rotting beneath the surface. Asterisk. But he didn't write a book about you, Joe pointed out. You drew first blood in public. Asterisk. Harry let out a sharp laugh. Oh, come on. The British press has been writing books about me my entire life. I just finally responded. Funny how the world only calls it too much when I defend myself. Asterisk. Defend, Joe repeated. Or attack. Asterisk. Harry's eyes flashed. Spoken like someone who's never been hunted by cameras since the age of 12. It's easy to sit in a Texas studio and moralize. Asterisk. Joe's expression cooled. I don't moralize. I ask questions. Asterisk. Right, Harry snapped. Questions, packaged as judgment. You're not fooling anyone. Asterisk. The mood in the studio shifted again, the air thickening. Joe's show thrived on heated debates, vaccines, politics, aliens. But this was different. This wasn't two men exchanging ideas. This was one man dragging the full weight of a monarchy into the room and daring anyone to challenge his version of events. Asterisk. Joe inhaled slowly. Look, Harry, you came here. I didn't drag you in. You wanted this platform. Asterisk. I wanted an honest conversation, Harry shot back. Not another performance where we pretend neutrality while interrogating. The spare. Asterisk. And I wanted a guest who doesn't assume every question is an attack, Joe replied. Eyes locked on him. Asterisk. For a brief, dangerous second. It felt less like a podcast and more like the opening round of a title fight, both men still standing, but already swinging harder than intended. Asterisk. Joe broke the stare, glanced at his notes, then looked back up. Okay, he said. Let's talk about Meghan, because you knew it was coming. Asterisk. Harry's shoulders squared. Of course, because the world still can't handle a woman of color marrying into that family without dissecting her every breath. Asterisk. Joe shook his head. It's not about that for a lot of people. They see a pattern. Every time something goes wrong, it's the crown, the press, the institution, the tabloids. It's never you two. Asterisk. That's because we're not the problem. Harry replied, his voice low and icy. Asterisk Joe's fingers drummed lightly on the table. Yeah, he said softly. We'll see what people think after they hear the rest of this. Asterisk, something shifted in Harry's expression, not defensive now, but dangerous. As if he'd decided this wasn't an interview anymore. It was a battleground, and he'd just declared war on the host. Asterisk, the air in the studio felt charged, almost humming. The neon lights behind Joe flickered subtly as if reacting to the tension. Joe leaned back, fingers interlaced. Harry leaned forward, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a man who believed he was being persecuted rather than questioned. Asterisk, all right, Joe said calmly. You said people dissect Meghan's every breath. So let me ask something simple. Do you think any criticism of her is ever valid? Or is every negative story automatically part of some conspiracy? Asterisk, Harry inhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. When you're married to a woman as powerful and misunderstood as Meghan, criticism is rarely about facts. It's about jealousy, ignorance, and racism. Asterisk, Joe rubbed his forehead. That's a heavy generalization. You're saying millions of people across different countries all have the same motive? Asterisk, millions of uninformed people? Harry shrugged. Yes, asterisk, Joe gave a tired laugh. You hear how that sounds, right? Like anyone who disagrees with you is beneath you. Asterisk, Harry smirked. If they're repeating tabloid nonsense, then yes, they are. Asterisk, inside the control room, the producer muttered under his breath. He's unbelievable. Asterisk, Joe leaned forward again. Not everyone who disagrees with you hates you. Sometimes people just point out contradictions, like moving to America for privacy. Then doing documentaries, interviews, podcasts. Asterisk, you don't get to lecture me about my choices, Harry cut in. Privacy doesn't mean hiding. It means choosing how much access you give people. Asterisk, Joe nodded slowly. Okay, then let me ask you directly. If you hate the press, if you think the institution is toxic, if you want control, why do you keep doing interviews? Asterisk, Harry didn't hesitate. Because I deserve to be heard. My story deserves space. And frankly, people like you need to hear it. Asterisk, people like me. Joe asked. Asterisk. Yes, Harry said, his smile sharpening. People who sit in soundproof studios judging lives they've never lived. People who think a few UFC fights and a Spotify contract qualify them to analyze centuries of monarchy. Asterisk, Joe's eyebrows rose. Damn. Asterisk, but Harry wasn't finished. You want to dissect my marriage, my family, my decisions, but you've never experienced anything close to my reality. You talk about humility, but you expect me to bow to you in this room. Asterisk, Joe leaned back, arms spread. I don't expect you to bow to anyone. I'm sitting here having a conversation. You're the one turning it into a firefight. Maybe because you're not used to interviewing someone who challenges you? Harry shot back. Joe nodded once. True, usually. My guests don't insult my audience. Asterisk, Harry shrugged. Maybe your audience should toughen up. Asterisk, a sharp exhale came from behind the glass. Even the hum of the air conditioning felt louder. Asterisk, Joe raised a hand. All right, let's reset. Straight question, no drama. When's the last time you spoke to William? Asterisk, Harry's lips pressed into a thin line. Why should I answer that? Asterisk, because you wrote about him? Because you've talked about him publicly. Puz, the world's curious. Asterisk, the world is always curious. Harry said dismissively. They want conflict, pain, details. And people like you feed that appetite. Asterisk, Joe nodded. Maybe. But you feed it too. You said he shoved you, broke your necklace. Do you stand by that? Asterisk, Harry's eyes flared. Every word. Joe leaned forward slightly. You don't see how putting that out publicly might have made reconciliation harder. Asterisk, Harry stiffened. Reconciliation isn't possible when one side refuses to acknowledge their wrongdoing. Asterisk, but forgiveness doesn't always come with conditions, Joe replied. Sometimes you give it even if the other person never says sorry. Asterisk. I'm not Jesus, Joe, Harry snapped. I'm not here to be saintly. I'm here to protect myself. Asterisk, Joe opened his hands. Protect yourself or punish them. Asterisk, Harry's voice dropped, colder than before. I don't punish, I reveal. If the truth hurts them, that's their burden. Asterisk, Joe rubbed his face, clearly frustrated. Man, has anyone in your life ever told you that maybe you're part of the problem? Asterisk, Harry bristled instantly. That's what weak people say when they can't accept the truth. Asterisk, the words hung in the air. Even Joe leaned back at that. Asterisk. Wow, he said quietly. So now, anyone who questions you is weak. Asterisk, Harry didn't blink if the shoe fits. Asterisk, Joe's jaw tightened. This was the moment the dynamic shifted. When the host stopped seeing a difficult guest and started seeing an unchecked ego spiraling in real time. He sighed deeply. Okay, let's change gears before this turns into a shouting match. Asterisk, Harry smirked. It already has. You just don't want to admit you're losing control of your own show. The control room froze. Joe's eyes narrowed. Oh, he said softly. You think that's what's happening here? Asterisk, Harry shrugged and leaned back, arms crossed. I've faced tougher interrogations. This is the best you've got? I'm not impressed. Asterisk, Joe stared at him for a long moment, lips pressed together as he inhaled slowly through his nose. For the first time in the interview, Joe Rogan looked genuinely irritated. Asterisk, the studio air felt thick enough to cut. Joe sat in silence, trying to recalibrate before the conversation spun completely out of control. Behind the glass, producers stared at the monitors like they were watching a slow-motion crash. Harry, meanwhile, looked satisfied, chin lifted, arms crossed, wearing the smug expression of someone who thought he'd just scored a decisive point. Asterisk, Joe exhaled. All right, let's get back on track. I didn't realize we left it, Harry replied with a smirk. Joe ignored the jab. Let me ask you something about responsibility. Asterisk, responsibility. Harry scoffed. Well, that's rich coming from you. Asterisk, dude, Joe said, holding up a hand. This isn't a sparring match. I'm trying to have a conversation. Asterisk, no. Harry shot back, leaning forward. You're trying to corner me? Same tactic as everyone else. Ask a loaded question. Wait for me to react, then act surprised. Asterisk, Joe closed his eyes briefly. Okay, forget responsibility. Let's talk about the book. Harry's expression shifted pride, mixed with irritation. In Spare, Joe continued, you shared some deeply personal stuff about your brother, your father, even the frostbite story. Asterisk, a few quiet chuckles escaped from the crew. Harry shot a glare toward the glass. Asterisk, do you regret any of that now that some time's passed? Joe asked. Asterisk, no. Harry replied without hesitation. Everything I wrote needed to be said. Asterisk, Joe raised his eyebrows. Even the part about William knocking you to the floor. Asterisk, yes, Harry said sharply. Especially that part. Asterisk, and the necklace breaking. The dog bowl. Asterisk, Joe, Harry snapped. If you're going to mock my trauma, this conversation is over. Asterisk, I'm not mocking anything, Joe said calmly. I'm asking if maybe you overshared? Asterisk, Harry scoffed. Overshared? That's the problem with the world. Everyone's too sensitive. How else was I supposed to tell my story? Whisper it to myself in the mirror. Asterisk, no one's asking you to hide, Joe replied. But there's a difference between being open and dumping every private detail to the public. The public deserves the truth, Harry said flatly. Joe blinked. The public doesn't deserve your family's private life. Harry barked. A laugh says the man whose entire career is built on broadcasting conversations. Behind the glass, a producer muttered, "He's unreal." Joe fought the urge to roll his eyes. You keep calling yourself a truth teller. You say you're free. But honestly, you sound angry. Bitter. Harry leaned back, crossing his legs like a king settling onto a throne. I'm enlightened, Joe. That's why people like you get irritated. I don't play by your rules, Joe. Gestured around the room. You're literally playing by my rules. This is my studio. And yet, Harry said with a smirk, you seem threatened. Something snapped. Joe slowly removed his headphones and set them on the table. Threatened, he repeated softly. By you. You're flustered, Harry replied. Joe stared at him for a beat. All right. Let's talk about William again. No, Harry said sharply. That topic is closed. Why us? Joe asked. You've been open about everything else. Harry growled under his breath. Because I'm tired of you people asking the same questions. William this, William that. Maybe talk about my achievements for once. Joe studied him. What achievement would you like to talk about? Harry hesitated just long enough for Joe to notice. Then he snapped. You wouldn't understand. Try me, Joe said, folding his arms. Harry straightened, chin high. I've built a global platform. I've redefined what it means to be a modern royal. I've exposed corruption. I've inspired millions. Joe stared at him. Did you?